It was about really understanding what was the cultural movement happening around women's sport and women's football, and really tapping into that into the right way so that we could get the results that we had.
Hey there, James here, and you're listening to the Own the Moment podcast, the show where we explore the complex and always evolving landscape of marketing, advertising, and branding, and try to get to the bottom of what it means to be a truly memorable brand. The Own the Moment podcast is brought to you by Como Technologies, a self-service, complete customer engagement platform that helps you cut through the noise to truly connect with your customers and retain and grow those connections over time. With Como, you can build and deploy new campaigns, activations, promotions, and programs in days, not months, and our software is used by some of the world's biggest consumer brands, from Heineken to Budget, Goodman Fielder, Foxtel, JLL, Williams Racing, and McDonald's. Learn more at como.tech. Welcome to a special episode of the Own the Moment podcast, diving into the unforgettable 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup, an event that became a global cultural milestone, particularly in Australia. This tournament shattered records in every aspect. Over 2 million tickets were sold, nearly 12 million Aussies tuned in to witness the Matildas' gripping semi-final on TV, and we saw average crowd attendances of around 30,000 people, far surpassing France 2019's average of just 20,000. But let's be clear, this success wasn't merely luck, good timing, or just because the Matildas happened to be playing well. My conversation with Kim Anderson, the head of marketing for the FIFA Women's World Cup 2023, reveals a different story. A story of thoughtful planning, the application of basic marketing fundamentals, and captivating storytelling. In this episode, Kim and I delve into the marketing strategies that fueled this monumental success. We explore how they secured the bid, unravel the significance of the tournament's brand platform Beyond Greatness, and discuss why Women's World Cup 23 stands as a watershed moment in the discourse around women's sports, earning its title as a tournament of firsts. Enjoy the show. Kim Anderson, thanks for coming on the show.
A pleasure. Nice to be here.
Awesome. So we're going to talk a lot about the Women's World Cup today, but I just want to throw a few stats at, I guess not you because you're very aware of these, but the listeners. And maybe those who, people who were living under a rock and missed just how absolutely huge it was. I mean, just a couple of stats. All of the TV records in Australia were broken. That Matildas semi-final game was, almost 12 million people watching. A couple of million tickets were sold, which smashed a target, which I guess you guys had put out at around 1 million. I think, interestingly, it was so much bigger than France 2019. The average crowd for 23 was 30,000, averaged 21,000 in France. Before we dig into all of these amazing successes, how did you, Kim, find yourself at FIFA and working on Women's World Cup 23?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not a traditional path, I would have thought, to doing something like that. I started out my career in sports marketing, so very much sports always been a passion. So I worked across a number of sports properties early on in my career, including Sydney FC. So had some exposure to football marketing. I then went away and did a whole bunch of other things, ended up in New York working in the design and innovation industry for a few years, and came back to Australia at the beginning of 2019 expecting to do a whole bunch of consulting in that sort of space. And the woman who sort of led the Australian side of both the bid but also the World Cup, Jane Fernandez, we had known each other through my time at Sydney FC, and she reached out and said, I need some support on a marketing campaign for the Australian bid, which was just a solo bid at that time, and famously said to me, I just need your help for 3 months to kick this thing off, and then you can go on your merry way. So 5 years on, not quite what happened, but yeah, that was sort of my entry point. So very unexpectedly sort of back in that sports space, and on a very exciting bidding process.
Yeah. And so talk me through the bid. I mean, from a marketing and sort of mechanical process, like what actually goes into a bid and winning something like that? Because, I guess the sort of naive person in me would think that it's much more about logistics and money. But obviously, sort of there is a marketing side. Talk me through, what does that look like, and what sort of things are you doing, and how did you think about going about winning
Yeah, absolutely.
or securing the bid rather?
Yeah, I think you're right in that it is much more of an election campaign than it is sort of a typical marketing campaign. So it's, your ultimate audience is the voters. And for us, that was the 37-member FIFA Council who were going to vote on who secured the 2023 hosting rights. So, Jane and the other part of the team were very much in the nuts and bolts of the operational side. What venues are we going to propose? How are we going to deliver this tournament? My job was to stoke enthusiasm, not only in the voters, but also in, I guess, the general public. So we ran our Get On Side campaign. We got 800,000 people signing up saying they're excited about the tournament. And that for us was a unique part of what we did versus the other bidders. So I think Japan had their own website. No one else ran a social media campaign. No one else had sort of like this public registration campaign. And so that was quite unique for FIFA to be able to see there is genuine interest in this country for people to want to host this. And so we had that already sort of in train by the time we then also partnered with New Zealand. And for us, that gave us, I guess, an extra narrative and what we called our tournament of first. So, in order to co-host the tournament, we would be the first to co-host, we would be the first to host it in this region. So for us, it was really about showcasing, I guess, a growth strategy for FIFA, which really aligned with where they were taking their women's football strategy. So it was many things, but I think from a marketing point of view, it was very much about identifying what does FIFA really want, what are their key drivers, and how can we translate that into public enthusiasm for the bid, but also a really strong brand narrative.
Yeah, for me, that's so surprising that other countries wouldn't be engaging the public. Did that surprise you, or is that sort of the status quo for this sort of thing? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't seen, from what I could see, particularly from a women's bidding campaign, I certainly hadn't seen people stoking that enthusiasm. I think that will change now with campaigns moving forward. Right. Certainly, even with our failed men's bid campaign of 2010, there was a large-scale ad campaign. There was a public messaging out there, but I don't think people have ever, from what I've seen, gone to that sort of more grassroots marketing style of real community and fan engagement to showcase, a community and a movement behind a bid.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to come back to fan engagement in a couple of moments, because I think that's something that just from the outside looking in was sort of really apparent. And so, okay, so you win the bid, and, the tournament sort of, I don't know what it was like on the inside, but at least from the outside, it felt like it was sort of big from day one. Talk a little bit about the ramp up. So when did you secure the bid, just for context?
Yeah, so that was June 2020. So the last few months of the campaign were, lockdown, COVID.
Right.
Fascinating time. And I think that was the other thing that probably I could touch on in terms of the bid is we could very quickly, because we'd already built all the building blocks around the brand and our campaign, we could very quickly pivot into digital storytelling to those voters.
Right.
Because we could no longer fly over, not that I was doing the flying, but our execs could no longer fly over and do that advocacy in person. And so I think that was a strength of our bid in the end, that our storytelling was core to what we were offering FIFA. So back to your question.
Take me...
Back to your question, I guess, yes.
Sorry, go on.
We won in 2020 and then FIFA took sort of a year to set up the entity, the local entity that would run the World Cup. And so that for me was sort of a year of doing other consulting projects, some in the football space, some not. And then August 2021 was when I joined the FIFA team. I think I was, employee number 4 or 5, something like that. And so from there, we had sort of 2 years to deliver the Women's World Cup, which for context is not a lot of time. Qatar, the last Men's World Cup, they had 12 years. So we certainly were
Oh, wow.
we started in lockdown. I think we were back in lockdown by the time I started, and the first 4 months were in lockdown, no team, trying to do a virtual brand launch. It was a really difficult way to start, I guess.
So take me back into sort of mid 2020 and even 2021. Was there ever a fear that, because I assume one of the things that must have been challenging was actually not knowing, like, it sounds so silly now, obviously, right? But there was a time when it was like, well, I don't know what 2023 looks like. Can we put people in a stadium? Talk me through, without sharing anything you can't share, but like, were there actual conversations back then around like what happens if? And sort of contingencies, and what were those conversations like sort of in the peak of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, you might recall that the Tokyo Olympics got delayed by a year, and so
Right.
that was happening as I was starting this
Oh,
job, and so we were literally having those conversations. Will we have an empty stadium? Will we have 9 empty stadiums? How will we deal with that?
oh,
What are the other ways we can engage? I mean, it was a very real reality of how do you recruit a workforce completely remotely? How do you get people excited about a live event that may not be live in sort of this climate? So
oh,
there was, aside from all of the general obstacles that you kind of face when you're trying to deliver a women's sport property, all the naysayers, we were also facing some really, realistic landscape market conditions that we couldn't control.
you mentioned there that Qatar had 12 years and you guys had a couple of years. Tell me, why that disparity? Is that something to do with women's versus men's sport, or how can it be that Qatar gets 12 and you guys get 2? What actually leads to that?
Yeah, look, I think it's just a traditional inequity in the bidding process that FIFA has used in the past. So I think the Men's World Cup is the biggest global sporting event on the planet, and we are the next biggest global sporting event on the planet now, but that wasn't always the case. And so I guess with the level of investment, the level of broadcast and attendance interests, there's always been a longer lead time for the men's, and I think the women's is now catching up because it has become such a blockbuster event.
Yeah, okay. So the Women's World Cup, like, it clearly exceeded expectations. The numbers were bonkers, both like viewership and just like the general like vibe in the community. And so I know I've heard you say in other interviews that there was a lot of skepticism, at least initially. Where do you think that came from? And sort of, I assume you think it was very unfair, but how did you think about the skepticism and sort of tackling that head on? And did you see it sort of wane? And what do you think the reasons for that were? So to talk about the
Yeah, look, I
skepticism
think,
up front.
if you work in women's sport long enough, you'll know it's a battle of resilience. It's a battle for
Mm,
visibility, for credibility, for investment. So to me, it was no
mm,
surprise that there was a lot of
mm,
skepticism around
right.
what this could be. And I think there's so much momentum in women's sport at the moment. We're constantly breaking new records.
Mm,
So of course, there is a lot of skepticism that we won't beat something again. So for us, it was France 2019. People had seen that it was a blockbuster event, but it was also hosted in the European stronghold for football in summertime. And so
right.
could we, as a relatively new territory for FIFA, in winter against AFL and rugby
Mm,
and all the other sports, possibly deliver the same thing? There was undoubtedly a lot of skepticism. I think it's laughable now to look at where the Matildas are,
right.
but back when I started on the bidding campaign, they still had relatively low crowds. And historically, a decade ago, they only had a couple of thousand. So their viewership wasn't as great. They were fighting
Wow.
for equal pay. Their sponsorships weren't as amazing. Literally today, the Australian word of the year is Matilda. So look how far we've come. So I think for us, it was about really understanding what was the cultural movement happening around women's sport and women's football, and really tapping into that into the right way so that we could get the results that we had. A lot of people ask me, did I expect that we would get to 2 million people in the stands? I always thought we would beat our target of 1.5. I thought we would get maybe 1.7, 1.8, but to get 2 million was amazing. And so it really was about having the right brand strategy, staying true to our strategy and not freaking out every time we hit an obstacle or we hit another naysayer, because that was constant. Even up till the day before the tournament, people didn't think we were going to be a success. So it is about being resilient throughout, I think, and having that belief that the strategy will deliver.
Yeah, and so let's talk about the strategy. So, like you have this brand platform, Beyond Greatness. Talk a little bit about where that came from. I know you've said in other interviews you really tried to position World Cup 23 as a cultural movement rather than a football tournament, which definitely seems to have worked. Talk about like the insights that went into that, maybe some of the sort of the development and why you think it ultimately
Look,
sort of
again,
worked.
I think France 2019 was a huge success. The brand platform for that was Dare to Shine. We're told it means a little bit more in France, like it translates better than what it does in English. But to me, Dare to Shine is still coming from a place of striving for credibility. And that's not where I thought we were in terms of women's sport. These are incredible athletes. What we needed to do was build a stage that was deserving of them, build an incredible fan experience, build a commercial structure that partners could get a part of and leverage. And so for us, it was about tapping into, behaving more like a culture brand than a sports brand, and really leaning into what do we want to represent and what are all the different entry points for people to be a part of that. And so there was already, we were building off the success of the European Championships and the Women's World Cup before us and all these other things that were happening in sport. We'd seen the Black Ferns, win the Rugby World Cup in New Zealand, which was a really important moment for them culturally. And so it was about understanding what are all the entry points for people. So for me, it was multiculturalism. So understanding that there are all these teams coming here, and the strength of our bid was we have 300 cultures and 200 languages. So, 200 cultures and 300 languages. And so how could we make it feel like an amazing atmosphere that everyone wants to be a part of, and that even those neutral games would feel like home games? How could we use music as a lever to kind of become a more entertainment property for people and draw people in? How could we look at what's great about women's football, not looking at men's sport, and becoming this really inclusive, welcoming place for people where everyone felt like they could be a part of it. Men's sports can be quite intimidating places, particularly men's football. And so we wanted to be a space where everyone felt like they could be celebrated, they could be a part of the movement. And so that's where Beyond Greatness was born. It was about impact on the pitch, but impact off the pitch as well.
Yeah, it feels like there's almost more happening off than on, like it feels very much like a lot of the brand work was actually more about everything other than the football. And that's not to take away from the football, but it's broadening, because I think, and it's been said 100 times or a million times, but like the fascinating thing about the World Cup for me was just like how many people got excited that have never watched a game of, men's football in their life. I sort of count myself as one of those people, right? I'm sort of not a soccer fan, but couldn't help but get sort of dragged in. which is interesting. So you talked a little bit about sort of fan engagement and that sort of experiential piece, whether it's music. Talk more about sort of, what strategies did you guys take into the World Cup, and sort of, you said sort of best in class fan experience and engagement. What does that mean, and what sort of things did you guys do that
Yeah,
maybe stand out a
absolutely.
little
Well,
bit?
again, I mean, I think it comes back to that strategy that we were just talking about. So if you are going to fill the stadium with 1.5 million fans, that is more than,
Mm,
I mean, it may not be now, but at the time it was more than what the Matildas could fill for us in terms of that fans, or more than even what a sports fan or a football
right.
fan could fill. So we called those guys the Convincibles. So people who might resonate with
Mm,
us have all those entry points that I talked about before, but we needed to give them an experience of the brand that made them feel included, made them feel like they were united in this journey
mm,
with us around what the brand represented. And so there were lots of different things that we did. I think the music program was really integral. That was everything from the sonic identity that was part of the
mm.
brand to the musicians that we had at the tournament, the unity beat that we created. So, uh,
What
the
was that?
unity
I
beat. So
missed
the
that. The
unity
Unity
beat
beat.
was a chant that we created for everyone to participate in. So again, using that insight of
Mm.
men's
Oh, right.
football you go to and you feel like if you don't know the chants of the team, you're not really part of the experience. And so we wanted to create this chant that was something that
Right.
celebrated greatness in everyone, but was something that everyone could be a part of. And so young
Mm,
kids, families, they were enjoying coming and experiencing that and singing along to that. It was a really simple chant. It was an easy thing you could tap your feet to.
mm,
It didn't matter if you sang it
mm,
or you just danced to it. You could, participate in whatever way you want. So it became this shared cultural experience that people really vibed into. So that was something that was, I guess,
mm.
part of the in-stadium experience. But then we also had our Unity pitch. So our Unity pitch was this vibrant, patchwork of colours football pitch that we took around to each of the host cities and around to
Right.
each of lots of regional locations as well. And so it was a space for the community to gather. Sometimes we had salsa dancing on there. Sometimes we had blind football
Hmm.
or a wheelchair sports or, just a kick around for people. So it became this space which, yes, had some
Mm,
competitive games on it at time, but it wasn't about being an elite athlete. And so that was a really crucial way
hmm.
of getting visibility for what we represented and what you could be a part of, but allowing everyone to be in that. I think aside from that, closer to the
Mm.
tournament time, we had our trophy tour. You'd be surprised how many people get excited about a
Right.
trophy traveling around different places. But I think that was just another mechanic for us to do storytelling. So finding local people who'd gone
Mm,
beyond greatness in their community and sort of bringing that to life.
mm.
And the last but not least was the fan festival, one of my favourites. So I think if you're thinking
Right.
about drawing people into a tournament like ours, the fan festival was sort of a stepping stone. So you might have gone to the fan festival to think, yeah, I might watch a bit of football on there, but actually I'm going there to listen to a music artist or do some cultural activities with my kids, whatever
Yep.
it might be, see the sponsor activations. And it became this stepping stone where people got caught up in the atmosphere and the vibe that was around the tournament and then started purchasing tickets and going to these matches as well. So that for us, I think that entertainment destination was really critical and also showed the seriousness with which FIFA
Mm,
was taking this tournament. We were putting forward best in class experiences all
mm.
over the place to showcase that this was a product we were investing in and a product that mattered.
Yeah, and we were actually a part of the fan festival in Perth, sort of as a tech partner, and yeah, I mean it was massive. I walked sort of, we were there a lot, and even just every day, walking home, it was packed, and it was particularly that sort of family and kids piece, which I think is so much a part of the success. So you talked about like mass cultural moments, and this was like, I mean, this is like one of the biggest mass culture moments I can remember. Like definitely in sport, and maybe even beyond that. It's hard to sort of think of something that was more uniting in the last 5 or 10 years. And so obviously that's a huge opportunity for commercial partners, and you talked a little bit about that. Talk about how you guys thought about partners, sponsors, and what sort of opportunities there were, and how did you sort of help them get involved
Yeah,
in
so I think,
Beyond Greatness?
first of all, it was a real step change for FIFA for this tournament. So it was the first time that they separated out the commercial rights for the women's properties. So previously, as an
Right.
Adidas or as a Coke, you had to buy into the men's tournament in order to get the women's tournament, which, through no fault of anyone's, it's the way the world has traditionally worked. The women's becomes a bit of a side dish. It's not the main event. And so for the first time, we separated those rights out so that you could buy into the women's football pillar. And so we saw amazing brands like Zero step up to the plate, Visa, who are now just invested in women's football. Zero is an amazing brand where all they've done is sponsor women's football properties around the world, and we were there first. And so I think with that, you get a level of investment and intent and brand alignment and audience alignment that you don't see when you have the former strategy. And I think it also did start to make some of the other brands like Coke and Adidas, who are amazing partners of both the men's and the women's side, think about their strategies differently. It wasn't just adapting their men's football campaign for the women's tournament 6 months later. They truly invested in separate campaigns for that. And so I think, that journey was sort of a collaborative one. Everything from me presenting and sharing the brand from the very beginning and making them a part of that process to doing collaborative workshops and sessions to make sure that what they were delivering was aligned with Beyond Greatness. And so I think we saw, Coke had their Believing is Magic campaign and a real focus on diversity and inclusion. We had Visa with Behind Every Number There's a Story, and so they were doing a lot of storytelling about players on the pitch and the power of these incredible athletes and the possibilities that creates. Zero was about the beautiful game and beautiful numbers. So, improving numbers off the pitch can help, grassroots clubs thrive. So I think they very much brought into that space. And then we saw brands like Adidas who loved what we were doing in the music space in particular. And so whilst they were doing cool stuff like putting Mary Fowler and Caitlin Ford on giant billboards in Sydney, which really just showcased, how momentous this event was and how incredible these athletes were. They were also doing collaborations with artists like Benny that we were using to really sort of tie everything together. So, I loved working with the partners. I think we had an incredible suite of people who were really dedicated to what they were trying to achieve and dedicated to the social impact that we were trying to have as well.
Yeah, amazing. And so, I guess, so the tournament ends, and I guess the big question on everyone's mind, right, is how do you sustain that momentum? And obviously, I guess it's sort of hard. A World Cup is by definition a sort of a big moment, and sort of there's the next big moment will come. But how did you guys at FIFA think about maintaining the momentum, over the next few years?
Absolutely. I think FIFA's traditionally worked really closely with all of their member associations on this women's football strategy, trying to look at how, emerging nations like Afghanistan through to, powerhouses like, France can actually kind of continue to grow their women's football capacities. But I think for us, Australia and New Zealand, you would have seen Football Australia and New Zealand Football have invested heavily in their legacy campaigns. And that's something that was done really intently. I know that Football Australia, after the Asian Cup in 2015, they saw a 20% spike in participation, but eventually that sort of withered away. And so they took a much more proactive approach, even from the beginning of the bidding process, to say, we will invest in legacy. What do we need to do? And so that is where the work is now, is actually maintaining that momentum. And I hope to see more and more of that. I think, with the A-Leagues, we've seen an 800% growth in
Yep.
women's football memberships. There's lots of good signs, but it does take commitment, it does take investment, and it does take innovation. People are
Yep.
going to have to, the next Women's World Cup is going to have to shift the needle even further, and I look forward and I'm excited to see what they do next. I hope they blitz it.
Yeah, those are big shoes to fill. So I have to ask you, before we move on to the quick fire round, what was your favourite moment from
Oh
the
gosh,
tournament?
there are so many,
If you
but
had to pick one.
I think for me, I was lucky enough to be in Brisbane for the Matildas quarterfinal for that incredible penalty shootout. Yeah,
Oh,
something I'll never forget.
crazy. Yeah, for me, it's
Yeah,
the
look,
Sam Kerr
I
goal
felt
in the
like
second.
I was in the
Uh,
stands for that one, and I felt like I saw it in slow motion.
crazy.
I was sort of like, what is she doing? She's off on her own. And then, yeah, it was literally
Yeah,
just a truly amazing moment, and something I'm
mental.
so happy for her that she got that moment after all the struggles with her injuries. She truly deserved to have her sort of moment in the sun.
Yeah, and it's funny because it feels like that's one of those moments now that's going to be in montages forever. I mean, it's one of those sort of all-time Australian sports moments. So yeah, that's really, really cool. All right, so I want to pivot, Kim, into sort of more general marketing chat, and I want to start with your favorite marketing campaign from any brand
Oh,
of all
wow.
time.
Of all time is a big call. Look, I think one that I've probably been really impressed by in the last year is one you might be aware of, which is Correct the Internet. So it's a campaign. I always love campaigns where audiences can actually kind of interact and get involved. I think that's really cool. So the simplicity of this one is it's a tool to fix the inherent biases in our search engines that typically favour male
Mm.
results over females. And so I think it's just really impressive the
Hmm.
progress they've made, the awareness they've made. When you get icons like Billie Jean King, sharing your campaign and saying that you're doing the right thing, I think you're on the right track. They are literally shifting the dial for equity in that technology space.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I must admit, I've not seen. I've seen a couple of things pop up where it's been stuff like, what I think I saw something around like the men's US basketball team has won the most medals
Yes.
or whatever, and it's actually not true. And you do wonder, like, how can the
Yes.
search
Look, they
engine
do
be
learn from us. It's not just the
as sort
search
of
engine company's fault, but we need to re-educate the
right?
engines that it's not Cristiano Ronaldo. It's actually a player from Canada. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's an absolutely great one. Sort of that grassroots sort of social impact. Yeah. All right. So, what about the best brand in the world right now? And I guess best is maybe sort of, it might be your favorite, but what's a brand that you look up to and
Yeah.
are really
Look,
inspired
I
by?
think lately it's probably been Tourism Australia, and I was lucky enough to work with them quite a lot during the tournament. I think they're just doing a phenomenal job
Right.
of attracting
Yeah,
people back to our
absolutely.
country after the pandemic. And also just
Mm,
doing an amazing job in terms of marketing effectiveness. I think similar to what we were trying to achieve, they had a lot of
yeah.
naysayers about their Come Say G'day campaign and the sort of, animated kangaroo, sort of typical kind of
Mm,
stereotypical ways, I guess they were marketing Australia, but they truly listen to the audience that they're trying to market to, not to us here at home. And I think Susan
yeah.
Coghill and the team have just done a phenomenal job.
Yeah, there's a great lesson about sort of orientation, like marketing 101 there, right? You're not the customer. I have to plug, we have an episode with Susan Coghill coming out very soon. I interviewed her at South by Southwest a few weeks ago. And I mean, she was like, yes, everything at TA is absolutely brilliant, but even just, her work on Think Different, with Steve Jobs and Apple. So yeah, keep an eye out for that one. But I think that's a great choice. All right. So, what's the most overrated trend in marketing? What are you
Look, I
sick to
could say
death of hearing about?
AI, but that would be the obvious one.
Right. You would. Yeah. You wouldn't be the
I think
first.
it's probably for me sustainability. It's such a passion point for me, but I think
Interesting.
it's also like AI being used as such a buzzword, and so not many people, I think, and not many brands, I think, are truly investing in it to create meaningful impact. And so I would love to see more people taking it seriously as opposed to just shaping their copywriting around what sounds good.
Yeah. I think greenwashing is a great one. So, what about the opposite? What about underrated? What do you still feel like is
Look,
not talked about enough?
going back to Susan and the TA guys, I think marketing effectiveness. So I've always been a big believer that you need to use data to be able to, create a case in the boardroom. And I think that's something that we had to do consistently in this job. So,
Right.
Our ticket sales were phenomenal pre-tournament. Typically, you would expect 50% of your ticket sales to come during a major event, and we had smashed that. I mean, we were at 1.5, our target, within a couple of days of launching the tournament.
Wow.
But because they were so phenomenally good in Australia in the lead up, there was a lot of uncertainty within the ranks of Zurich's, HQ about our New Zealand ticket sales. But all the data and insights were showing us that excitement was there, intent to attend was there, our brand metrics were really strong, and our consumer insights told us that culturally, Kiwis just buy tickets the night before. They're not going to buy ahead of time unless it is
Interesting.
Something that they, unless it's Taylor Swift or whatnot. And so we didn't have the Matildas effect in New Zealand.
Sure.
They didn't know their team. Their team hadn't played at home for 4 years.
Right.
So, rugby is their big sport, not women's football. And so, I was trying to use data to really tell that story, and ultimately that is what happened, but it was not an easy one. So I'm all for marketing effectiveness and being able to use data to show, what is going to happen in a campaign.
Yeah. No, that's a great answer. Small side note, because I have to ask, did New Zealand get behind the Matildas in the end, or sort of did you actually see anything there with the sort of the sort of sibling rivalry? How did that actually play out as obviously the Matildas progressed?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, particularly after their team was out as well. So after the Wolfhounds had departed, I think we saw, still great viewership figures over there, as well as really full fan festival crowds watching Matildas matches. So, yeah, we love to have that sort of sibling rivalry, but I think ultimately they were rooting for us towards the end.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, so who, Kim, a marketer that inspires you that you think I should have on the show next? Who's someone that I should be talking to?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I honestly would talk to Rebecca Soden from Correct the Internet. I think she's doing such interesting stuff in this space, and it's not, it's not necessarily traditional marketing in terms of, selling products or whatnot, but I think the social impact that she's having and the social change she's having through this technology sports marketing campaign, it's really interesting. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, will do. Kim, thanks so much for coming on the show.
A pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Own the Moment podcast. If you liked this episode, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss upcoming episodes. And to suggest a guest or provide feedback, please visit our dedicated podcast hub at ownthemomentpod.com.